July 28, 1979. It's a hot summer day in Atlanta, Georgia, and a woman is collecting cans off an empty and abandoned lot off the side of Niskey Lake Road when she comes across the unmistakable smell of decomposition. The road is lined on each side by trees, and as the woman comes closer to the source of the smell, what she sees would soon begin over a year of terror for the children and families of Atlanta. There in the woods was the body of a young boy. After calling the police, authorities eventually identify the boy as Edward Hope Smith. His friends called him Teddy. Edward, 14 at the time, had been reported missing for a week before his body was found in the woods. The cause of death is determined to be a gunshot wound to the back, fired from a .22 caliber pistol, although the bullet was never recovered. As police reached the scene and began canvassing the area, they would soon realize that this was not the only body they'd find that day. Not far away, within 150 yards from Edward's body, was the body of another child, in a state of extensive decomposition. It was clear to authorities that this body had been in the woods much longer than Edward's had, and therefore might have been dumped at a different time. Due to the level of decomposition, it would take authorities over a year to identify him, but eventually, the body was determined to have been that of Alfred James Evans, who had been reported missing by his mother for a week prior to his body's discovery. He was 13 years old. The cause of death, asphyxia by strangulation. While the police were originally unwilling to acknowledge any correlation between the deaths of the two boys, they could not deny two things both children had in common. Both were black, and both came from low-income neighborhoods.
Teddy's parents have had no word from their son in all this time. The 14-year-old has never disappeared like this. But the family lives in a neighborhood where there is a great deal of crime among youths. When a 14-year-old wanders away from home, people aren't concerned.
But for cops in Atlanta, a city looking to build its reputation as a hub for national business, the deaths of two black boys were quickly swept under the rug, with little effort put into their investigations. But in the years to come, the names of these children would demand to be heard, ushering in one of the darkest periods in Atlanta's history.
These are not pleasant days on the south side of Atlanta. Someone has been abducting and murdering black children, and the police unable to make any headway or under fire. Sam Ford reports.
In the years leading up to the murders that would eventually put Atlanta's name on headlines across the nation, Atlanta was already in the spotlight for an entirely different reason. In the 1960s and 70s, Atlanta was one of many cities in the Deep South racing to become the new southern hotspot for business and commerce. After expanding its metropolitan area, Atlanta was committed to inviting the most hopeful and hardworking people to build their careers and businesses in the city. Gone were the days of being just another town in the Deep South. Atlanta was now competing for the title of the New South, not only becoming a leader in economics, but a cultural hub as well. Although, the city wasn't without its faults, and like many cities in the American South, Atlanta grappled with the ever-present racism entrenched in its systems. With a very recent history of KKK activity and lynchings, Atlanta's expansion and success still didn't solve the racial divide, and the people benefiting the most were the affluent white population of Atlanta, while black Atlantans were still facing the heat of systemic discrimination in housing, employment, and the justice system. However, over time, public opinion would soon shift when the city started to make tangible steps towards desegregating schools, even electing its first ever black mayor in 1973. Followed soon by its first black police chief, public safety commissioner, and city council president in the years following. Atlanta was changing, now proudly calling itself the city too busy to hate. On the surface, it seemed like the city was seeing new horizons, with the promise of equal opportunity and unprecedented growth, an image the city was determined to protect at all costs. So when reports of rising crime rates and missing black boys and girls were being raised, police and the media did its best to ignore the problem, maintaining its image lest the money stop flowing. That's why it was all too easy for the police to chalk up the two murdered boys to drug-related violence. But the communities these murders had affected did not accept this response, and as more children would be found, the Atlanta lawmakers would soon feel the heat. Only a few months after the discovery of Edward Smith and Alfred Evans, there came a slew of other missing black children, soon to be found dead in various parts of Atlanta. The third to be added to the list was 14-year-old Milton Harvey, who in early September 1979 was reported missing after he'd rode a bike to the bank to pay off a credit card statement for his mother. It was the first day of school that day, but Harvey had stayed home because he was embarrassed by the shoes his mother had gotten him. After paying the bill, somewhere in the 3 miles between the bank and his home, he disappeared. His bike would be found a week later on a dirt road, but it would take police another 2 months to find his skeletal remains off the intersection of Desert and Redwine Road, so badly decomposed that it was difficult to pinpoint the cause of death. This location was over 12 miles away from his home. To this day, his cause of death remains undetermined. Soon after, on October 21st, 9-year-old Yusuf Ali Bell would go missing after heading out on an errand to buy snuff or tobacco for an elderly neighbor. A store employee who recalls seeing Yusuf said he left the store at around 4:45 p.m. Another witness, who actually knew Yusuf Bell and his mother, then claimed she saw him entering a blue car on Fulton Street, but Yusuf's mother claimed that the witness was untrustworthy. For weeks after his disappearance, his community rallied to find him and bring him home.
What kind of a boy was he?
Basically a good boy, bright, outgoing to some extent, but not as outgoing as, say, my other son. He played drums, he played trumpet. He was running for treasurer of his class.
He was a well-loved boy in his neighborhood, known to all as a very bright and quick-witted kid. So when he went missing, neighbors were putting up flyers and asking everyone they could for information.
If there's somebody out there like that has him, I just wish they knew that somebody here loves him, that a whole lot of people love him, that this whole community loves him, and they want him back too.
To Yusuf's mother, the idea that he had simply run away, an explanation the police often suggested, made no sense.
He wasn't the kind of little boy that would run away. He's involved in everything. He's in the gifted program at Dunbar. He's involved in boys' club. He's involved in a karate class.
To her, it seemed as though the Atlanta PD wasn't taking her case seriously. So his mother, Camille Bell, decided to take matters into her own hands, pleading to cameras for the perpetrator to bring her son home.
Send him home. Just send him home. Just let him go and let him call us. We'll come pick him up. They don't have to even bring him back. Just turn him loose where he can get to a phone. Just send him home.
A few weeks later, on November 8th, 1979, his body would be found by a janitor in the crawlspace of an abandoned school. Upon examination, Yusuf's body showed signs of strangulation, with bruises and fingernail punctures found on his neck. His cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation. But what was different about this case was that it was the first time that investigators had found fibers on one of the bodies. On Yusuf's pants was a small piece of masking tape, and stuck to the tape were green carpet fibers. Now, this piece of information didn't mean anything to investigators at the time, but it would soon become the focal point of the investigation. Now, with 4 black children dead, 2 with similar causes of death, in the span of a few months, the community was beginning to question why the police were treating these cases as isolated incidents. One of the lead advocates in pressuring the police and the city to investigate these 4 murders properly was Camille Bell, mother of Yusuf Bell, who in the years to come would play a critical role in bringing attention to the victims.
What I'm saying to you is it's not enough to love your children. You got to love my children. You got to love everybody's children. If you see a child out there that's walking into trouble, don't say, well, his mama don't care. If you care, you say something. If it's important to you, you stop it. If you see a child getting into somebody's car, if it's his daddy's car and that's who he's going with, fine. So you get it, so you go over and you look a little foolish for a minute. But wouldn't you feel better looking a little foolish for a minute because you said something than having a pain in your heart from now on because you didn't?
She would later partner with other leaders in the community to ensure that her son's killer would be found. She would frequent City Hall and demand to speak to city officials. She did TV interviews pressuring the police to investigate the case, and organized within her local community to prioritize the safety of their children. But for the city officials of Atlanta, this growing uproar was becoming a problem. They had spent years cultivating an image of Atlanta that flaunted booming business and continuous growth, and now that image was at risk of being shattered. Trying to quell the panic, city officials continuously insisted that there was no link between the murders, and that they were all isolated incidents. The threat of bad press was so concerning that the city had even hired a public relations consultant to, quote, improve communications between the police and the public. But for Camille Bell, the question of who killed her son was still unanswered, and soon the group of concerned mothers would grow. Throughout Christmas and the New Year of 1980, the Atlanta child killer laid low. But a few months into the new year, the murders would start again, and this time more consistent than ever before. The first victim of 1980 would be 12-year-old Angel Latrice Lanier. She'd gone to her friend's house to watch Sanford & Sons, her favorite TV show, but had gone missing on the way back. Angel's body was found a week later tied to a tree, a few blocks from her home. She was found with women's underwear stuffed in her mouth and electrical cord tied around her hands. Her cause of death, like many of the others, was determined to be asphyxiation. But now, with 5 murders in 7 months and no word from police about similarities, the killer had grown bold. The next few murders happened on average almost every single month, sometimes even multiple times a month, for 14 months straight. Next was Jeffrey Mathis, who disappeared while running a quick errand to buy his mother's cigarettes. Some witnesses had come forward claiming that they'd seen Jeffrey for weeks, even months after his disappearance, but despite these sightings, Jeffrey was still nowhere to be found. Next came 14-year-old Eric Middlebrooks. After taking a phone call at around 10:30 p.m., Eric grabbed a hammer and some other hand tools and bolted out the door, saying he needed to fix his bike. Police were never able to figure out who this caller was, or why Eric needed to leave so quickly. The next morning, less than 24 hours after he'd left his house, Eric's body was found dumped behind a building that housed a bar. Upon examining the body, investigators found a clump of red fibers caught in Eric's shoe. His cause of death? Brain injury from a blunt instrument. The next few came in quick succession. June 9th, 12-year-old Christopher Richardson disappeared while walking to a nearby swimming pool. Camille Bell and a growing list of anguished mothers started putting pressure on the Atlanta PD, who at this point still didn't see the correlation between the murders. June 22nd, 7-year-old LaTanya Wilson was abducted from her home in the middle of the night. Her parents woke up the next morning to see the window pane in her room removed, the back door open, and LaTanya nowhere to be seen.
I just want my little girl found safely and brought home. I miss her and I love her.
A witness later recounted that she'd seen 2 men carrying LaTanya away the night she disappeared. The day after, 10-year-old Aaron Weich was last seen in a grocery store in southeast Atlanta. His body was found 1 day later, face down under a highway overpass. It was clear he'd fallen off the overpass, and his cause of death was determined to be positional asphyxiation. But because investigators assumed Aaron's death was an accident, his case wasn't associated with the Atlanta child murders until the next year.
For one thing, he was scared of height, and he wouldn't have been up on that bridge in the first place, and that was too far from home for him to be. And he never went down there.
July 9th, Anthony Carter disappeared while playing outside with a cousin. His body was found the next day, behind a warehouse with stab wounds to the back and chest. At this point, it had been 1 year since the murders began. 11 black children had vanished, 8 found dead, and 3 still missing. The city's children were being hunted, and their killer or killers were growing bolder with each passing month. The mothers of these children, much like the residents of Atlanta, had had enough. In June 1980, 3 mothers, Camille Bell, Willie Mae Mathis, and Venus Taylor, formed the Committee to Stop Children's Murders, or STOP for short, to pressure the Atlanta PD to investigate these cases as connected murders. And it worked, at least on the surface. Around a month later, the Public Safety Commissioner of Atlanta at the time, Lee Brown, announced the creation of a special task force dedicated to investigating the string of child murders that Atlanta had seen in the past year. The task force, initially composed of 5 officers, set out to identify patterns and connections between the cases. Around this time, they requested the assistance of the FBI Behavioral Science Unit and began compiling a list of victims they believed could be linked, an effort that would later come to define the entire investigation. This was supposed to be a turning point, a sign that the city was finally taking action and taking the children and mothers of Atlanta seriously. But if the killer was watching, he wasn't deterred. Just over a week after the announcement, another child disappeared. On July 30th, 1980, 10-year-old Earl Terrell headed to the local swimming pool with his friends, a familiar summer routine. But the day wouldn't go according to plan. After being caught roughhousing on deck a few times, Earl was kicked out and was seen leaving the pool on his own. What happened next is uncertain. A few witnesses recalled brief glimpses of him. One saw him crying alone at the corner of Jonesboro Road, while another claimed he stopped by a nearby house, looking for a friend who wasn't home. Somewhere along the path from the pool to his house, Earl Terrell disappeared. But this disappearance was not like the others the city had seen, because while his family was scouring the neighborhood looking for him, they received a call from what sounded like a middle-aged white man with a southern drawl. "I've got Earl," he was recounted as saying. "He's in Alabama. It will cost you $200 to get him back. I will call back on Friday." But the caller never followed up, and Earl wouldn't be found for another 6 months. This case marked one of the first times that the FBI actively stepped in. Up until then, the investigation had only been led by the Atlanta PD and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, but since the caller had claimed Earl had been taken across state lines, it suggested a potential federal crime, kidnapping. And under those circumstances, the FBI had the authority to intervene. But even with the FBI's involvement, months passed without answers. It wasn't until January 1981 that Earl's severely decomposed remains were found, alongside those of Christopher Richardson, who disappeared 7 months earlier. Now both boys' cause of death couldn't be determined, but the fact that they were found in the same secluded location was of interest to investigators. Although the kids didn't know each other, their remains could suggest that they might have been killed and dumped at the same time.
We don't know whether this represents a major breakthrough or not. What we do know is that we're giving these cases everything we have to find in one location the remains of 2 bodies that appear to be children. Obviously is a very significant occurrence.
While the police struggled to make sense of the connections, the killer, almost like clockwork, struck again. This time, it would be 12-year-old Clifford Jones, last seen collecting cans to sell with his cousins. After getting separated and going missing, his body would be found early the next morning, beside a dumpster at a shopping plaza. He was found wearing clothes that weren't his, and on those clothes were synthetic carpet fibers, just like the ones found on Yusuf Bell's body. Investigators concluded that just like Angel Lanier, Clifford had been strangled with a rope-like object. Clifford Jones marked the 13th missing or murdered black child in Atlanta, and for the mothers in the community, this was 13 children too many. Camille Bell and STOP ramped up their projects, holding press conferences for journalists to get the word out about what was going on in Atlanta. They took community safety into their own hands and organized neighborhood block groups meant to keep watch over the neighborhood's children.
We have not ruled out the fact that there's some relationship. All I've suggested is at this point, the information that we have has not tied it together to suggest a trend or a pattern.
The police department doesn't want to alarm the community. They're afraid of panic. But how many children do we have to lose in our neighborhoods before the police department says, hey, we've got a problem?
Thanks to the constant and unyielding efforts of STOP, the mayor expanded the Special Police Task Force from 5 officers to 17, whom he vowed were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and would not leave any stone unturned. But when 11-year-old Darren Glass went missing 1 month later, never to be seen again, the city of Atlanta would start to see the reputation it had worked so hard to build begin to crumble. As the month dragged on, businesses and companies began pulling out of the city, citing reasons like heightened crime rates. Atlanta's task force, whose implementation was once considered a huge victory, was now hitting dead ends and running out of leads. In the meantime, another young boy, 12-year-old Charles Stevens, would go missing and quickly be found the day after, shirtless with the same carpet-like fibers that had been found on other victims. With no clues and no suspects, a group of volunteers naming themselves the United Youth Adult Conference of Atlanta decided to take on the search themselves, organizing massive search parties to look for anything that could shed light on the disappearances. On their very first search, the group found the heavily decomposed remains of what was later determined to be LaTanya Wilson, the 7-year-old girl who was abducted from her apartment 4 months earlier. Following this discovery, the searches continued, becoming larger and more frequent, with even the mayor joining the over 3,000 people who had volunteered to support the searches. But although most of the community seemed united in finding the children, an old threat was resurfacing. The KKK, who'd already had a long and fraught history terrorizing Atlanta's black and minority populations, was still active, and many believed it was them behind the murders. With the rising racial tensions, especially after a deadly explosion at a daycare in Atlanta, city officials feared a potential race war. Although Mayor Jackson was doing his best to quell concerns, he was losing the trust of the black community, and as the city seemed to fall in on itself, more black children would go missing. On the morning of November 1st, 1980, 9-year-old Aaron Jackson disappeared from a shopping center before being found on the bank of the South River the next day, fully clothed except for his socks. His cause of death, once again, was similar to some of the earlier murders: asphyxiation, this time by smothering. Just 9 days later, on November 10th, 16-year-old Patrick Rogers, or Patman as his friends called him, had gone to his friend's house to ask if he was home. Upon being told that he wasn't by his friend's mother, Patrick told her that a man had expressed interest in recording some of their songs. Patrick and Junior Harper, the friend, had written multiple songs together, so this interest from a music promoter was exciting. Because Junior wasn't home, he left and told his mother that he'd be back. The next time Patrick would be seen was a month later, in the Chattahoochee River. His body was so decomposed that the medical examiners could only conclude that he had a skull fracture, noting his cause of death as trauma to the head. By this point, the murders were getting national attention, and while the FBI was initially hesitant to get involved because of the jurisdictional concerns, the growing pressure left them with no choice. On November 17, 1980, the Atlanta FBI office began a major investigation, deploying 25 full-time agents to work on the case, a number that would grow to 45 in the coming months. December came and went without another disappearance, but the new year brought a deadlier and more frequent pattern of killings. 1981 was shaping up to be Atlanta's deadliest year yet. Only 3 days into January, 14-year-old Luby Jeter told his mother that he was going to sell car air fresheners at a mall in southeast Atlanta, but never returned.
I always told him that when they go on any place, to go in a group. And he said, I always do that, Mama.
So he knows about this and you don't think he has done anything careless?
No, I don't.
Weeks later, his body would be found dumped on the side of a wooded road, strangled. Then came Terry Pugh, last seen at a shopping center selling empty plastic bottles. 2 days later, a passerby came across his body in DeKalb County, fully clothed and strangled. February 5th, 12-year-old Patrick Baltazar vanished on his way to a boxing match. A week later, his body was found again in DeKalb County, fully clothed and strangled. This time, police found small dog hairs and green carpet fibers on his body. Later that same day, Atlanta police found more skeletal remains of a different child, and upon comparing dental records with the children who were still missing, it was determined, controversially, to be those of Jeffrey Mathis, who'd vanished nearly a year earlier while running an errand for his mother. February 19th, 13-year-old Curtis Walker disappeared after going out to find work after school. It would be just under a month before he'd be found in only underwear floating face down in the South River. His cause of death, just like the others, asphyxiation. Now something was shifting with the killer's MO. Bodies were no longer being left on land, they were turning up in rivers. The reason? Investigators working on the case had let it slip to the media that they were finding carpet-like fibers on the victims, fibers that could help identify the killer. Once that detail was published on the front page of the Atlanta Constitution, bodies started to be found in the river, presumably to wash off any incriminating fibers. At this point, police were at varying stages of identifying suspects across the different cases. 14 of the 21 cases so far had absolutely no suspects. For the others, though, they had done varying degrees of investigation. For example, police had established a strong suspect for the murder of Clifford Jones, who was found behind a shopping plaza. They had 3 witnesses who claimed they saw a manager of one of the plaza stores go into a back room with a young black child. One of the witnesses claimed he'd actually seen this manager strangle and beat the victim before taking his body to the dumpster where he was later found. Police later interviewed this manager. His alibi couldn't be corroborated and he failed 2 polygraph exams, but police didn't charge the man because the witness who'd seen this had an intellectual disability. Nevertheless, the police at the time generally agreed that there wasn't one deranged killer. The cases, at least to the police, seemed too distinct. LaTanya Wilson was the only case that suggested a sexual motive. Edward Hope Smith was the only victim that was shot. Some victims were fully clothed, while others were stripped down to their underwear, or even wearing clothes that didn't belong to them. Despite this, some details did stand out as similarities across the murders. Most victims' cause of death was asphyxiation or strangulation, and the same carpet-like fibers had been found on some of the bodies. Of course, all victims were black children or young teens, which is why the Atlanta City Council applied a curfew on all youths under the age of 16 from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. But while this measure was intended to reassure the public, the murders continued. March 2nd, 15-year-old Joseph Bell would go missing after leaving a seafood restaurant because they didn't have work for him. Curiously, the day after he went missing, Joseph, or someone claiming to be Joseph, called the seafood restaurant and said, "I'm almost dead," and then hung up.
What do you think has happened to your son?
I think now he's been snatched. I really think now he's been snatched because he's been gone now a week and a few days, and if he was anywhere hiding, he'd have done been back home.
What do you think happened to him? I think he got snatched.
Do you really?
Yeah, I really think he got snatched. This don't happen in the last month to 5 weeks. 3 attempts done been right around this store. And, I think that's what might happen to him.
He wouldn't be found until over a month later in the South River with fibers similar to the ones found on other victims. And it wouldn't be the last time a mysterious call like that would happen. 13-year-old Timothy Hill, who had severe learning disabilities, would often call his special ed teacher, who he was very close to, after school. On March 13th, after picking up Timmy's call, she only heard sobbing on the other line. The person responded to the name Timmy, and after around 15 minutes, he abruptly hung up. A month later, he was found in the Chattahoochee River, and just like the other victims, only wearing underwear with traces of fibers. It was around this time when the continued killings drove residents to take matters into their own hands. Small groups of men, armed with bats and guns, began patrolling their neighborhoods. These groups, known as Bat Patrols, became a controversial response to the crisis. The most well-known of these Bat Patrols operated in Techwood Homes, Atlanta's largest housing project. But while some saw this as a necessary defense, others saw it as vigilantes with concealed weapons patrolling neighborhoods. Both the residents of Techwood and the Atlanta PD condemned the movement, fearing that vigilante justice would lead to innocent people getting hurt before the real killer was caught. In fact, on March 20th, Public Safety Commissioner Lee Brown would arrest 2 patrol leaders on charges of carrying a concealed weapon. But while chaos unfolded in the streets, the elusive Atlanta killer remained undeterred. Over the next 2 months, 7 more people vanished in quick succession. It seemed as though the killer was getting bolder, as 6 of the next 7 were adults, breaking the established pattern of younger victims. The first was 21-year-old Eddie Duncan, whose body was pulled from the Chattahoochee River 11 days after he vanished. Shortly after, 20-year-old Larry Rogers was found decomposing on the kitchen floor of an abandoned building. The next 2, Michael McIntosh and Jimmy Payne, both found in the Chattahoochee and both only wearing underwear. In the same month, 28-year-old John Porter was found stabbed 6 times on the sidewalk, but his case would never be officially added to the task force list. And shortly after, 17-year-old William Barrett was found strangled in a wooded area. This gruesome cycle of murders was becoming unbearable for the residents of Atlanta. It was May 1981, and 12 people had been found murdered just that year, 7 children and 5 adults. Police explained that the reason for this shift in the victims' age was because of their curfew. They claimed it had successfully kept children off the street, forcing the killer to go for older targets.
We find that there are indeed less children on our streets by virtue of the activities we've undertaken through the curfew, by virtue of the community involvement through the educational process of letting the community know that indeed we have extraordinary times in our community.
However, many residents and parents opposed this theory, claiming that the Mothers of Stop had contributed to the shift because of their community meetings, educating parents on how to keep their children safe and teaching kids how to avoid dangerous situations. In fact, the organization had even led a solidarity march in Washington, D.C., rallying national attention to the ongoing murders and demanding justice for the victims. All of this built up to the first major break in the case, one that would change everything. With more and more victims turning up in the Chattahoochee River, the FBI launched a major stakeout operation, monitoring 14 bridges from dusk till dawn. It was a large operation, with 72 officers stationed at key points along the river in hopes of catching the killer in the act. For weeks, the stakeouts turned up nothing but long, uneventful nights. Officers were usually sleep-deprived, dozing off, and exposed to the elements, insects, and animals. But around 3 weeks into this new surveillance operation, in the early hours of May 22, 1981, the entire case would change. Four officers, Gilliland, Holden, Campbell, and Jacobs, had been surveilling the James Jackson Parkway Bridge since 8 p.m. It was now a few minutes before 3 a.m., and police recruit Robert Campbell, who was stationed below the bridge on the riverbank, heard a loud splash in the water. Immediately, he grabbed his flashlight and pointed it at the river, seeing ripples where the splash had occurred, but no discernible object in the water. He notified the other police recruit, Freddie Jacobs, and asked him whether there was anyone on the bridge. Jacobs reported seeing a car heading southbound, close to the edge of the bridge, and going unusually slow. The car, after clearing the bridge, turned into a nearby liquor store parking lot, close to where the Atlanta patrolman Carl Holden was stationed. Upon entering the parking lot, the car, without stopping, did a U-turn before heading back onto the bridge, now being followed by Holden and Gilliland. The white car headed towards the Interstate 285 highway, where it was finally pulled over by the officers. The man in the Chevrolet station wagon identified himself as Wayne Bertram Williams, a 23-year-old musical talent scout. Upon being asked for his ID, Williams asked, quote, "What's all this about?" And when the officer told him they weren't at liberty to say, Williams responded, "I know this must be about those boys." Upon being asked where he was going at this hour, he claimed that he was trying to locate the house of a woman named Cheryl Johnson, who he planned to talk to later that morning about an acting job. Upon hearing this explanation, the officers were immediately confused. Wayne was traveling not to meet Cheryl, but only to find her house, and at 3 a.m., when the meeting was set for 9:30 a.m. The officers asked to search Wayne's vehicle. He complied. In fact, officers would later recall that Wayne remained cooperative during the entire stop, despite initially seeming a little nervous. In his vehicle, officers found clumps of dog hair. Wayne explained that his family owned a German Shepherd and that the dog had recently been in the car. In the back seat, they found 2 grocery-like bags filled with clothing, one containing women's clothing, which Wayne stated was his mother's, and the other men's clothing, including a pair of long pants and dress shoes. Wayne explained that these were his basketball clothes, and he usually wore long pants while playing basketball. As for the dress shoes, he said he'd left his basketball shoes at home. They also found a 24-inch nylon braided rope in the back. In the passenger seat, they found a pair of suede gloves and a flashlight, among other things. The officers asked Wayne if he threw anything off the bridge. He said he didn't. They asked him why he was going so slow on the bridge. He said he wasn't. They asked him why he stopped on the bridge at all. He said he hadn't. Wayne even denied making a U-turn after passing the bridge, claiming he kept on driving until the intersection at Bolton Road, and then turned back. And while some officers were questioning Wayne on the shoulder of the I-285, the others were back at the bridge, searching for anything they could use to detain Wayne further. However, no signs of a body were found in the river that night, and no blood markings were found on the railing of the bridge. Since there was no solid evidence to arrest Wayne Williams, the officers had no reason to seize any of Wayne's belongings and were forced to let him go. But this wouldn't be the last we'd see of Wayne Williams. It was around this time, right after the encounter with Wayne Williams, that people would start to notice that Nathaniel Cater, a 27-year-old man known to be staying at a local hotel, had gone missing. In reality, he had last been seen the day before Wayne was stopped, but it took 2 days before anyone noticed he disappeared. The very next morning, 2 FBI agents had shown up at Wayne's home, requesting an interview. Again, he complied and welcomed them inside his parents' house. Essentially, Wayne reiterated that he was out that night looking for the address of Cheryl Johnson, a woman that had called him a few days earlier to audition for an acting job. Wayne explained that he was the vice president and founder of a company called Nova Entertainment Corporation, and as part of his work, he would distribute flyers to the public, encouraging young people between the ages of 11 and 21 to contact him for auditions. 2 days later, on May 24th, Nathaniel Cater's body was found in the Chattahoochee River, naked, and upon autopsy, revealed to have died from asphyxiation. He was found around 1.2 miles downstream from the James Jackson Parkway Bridge, making him the latest name on Atlanta's growing list of victims. A few days later, the FBI asked Wayne to come down to the Atlanta FBI office, where they administered a polygraph test. Wayne himself later told the press that the questions were blunt and aggressive, with agents asking things like, "Well, you killed so-and-so, why'd you do it?" and "Why don't you quit lying to us?" Wayne claimed that the officers told him all his answers showed signs of deception, though in Georgia, polygraph results are not admissible in court. Wayne Williams was the first major suspect in the case, and even without solid evidence, police were determined to keep the pressure on. They quickly obtained a search warrant for Wayne's home and car, collecting carpet samples, fibers from various rugs throughout the house, hairs from his German Shepherd, and various photos, papers, and documents for further analysis. The next day, the Atlanta Constitution published Wayne's full name and address on the front page of their June 4th edition. Within hours, his home became a media circus, with reporters, photographers, and TV crews crowding the street, trying to capture the face of the man now at the center of Atlanta's most infamous murder case. But instead of shying away, Wayne took hold of the spotlight. That same day, he called a press conference from inside his parents' home, confidently proclaiming his innocence.
Did they ever call you a suspect? Did they ever use the word suspect?
They did, as strong as a suspect. They openly said, "You killed Nathaniel Cater, and you know it, and you're lying to us." They said that. And they said it on a number of occasions. They said it on that night. One of the task force captains on the scene pointed his finger at me and said he was tired of all the BS about working the long hours, working the stakeouts, and that he was ready to pull the thing to an end.
He also blamed parents for not keeping better watch over their children, saying, "Some of these kids are in places they don't have no business being at certain times of the day and night." Wayne asked that he remain anonymous during the press conference, only allowing tape recorders into his home, but his name was already plastered over every newscast and paper nationwide, making it impossible for him to stay out of the public eye. While Wayne spoke confidently about his innocence, behind the scenes, investigators were quietly building their case. The fibers and dog hair taken from his home were compared to the ones found on the various victims, especially Nathaniel Cater, the latest body found in the Chattahoochee. Fibers are small thread-like strands of material that can be transferred upon touching things like clothes, carpets, and rugs. What makes fiber evidence so valuable in a crime scene investigation is that each fiber has a unique cross-sectional pattern, which varies depending on the manufacturer. In the case of Wayne Williams, fibers found on multiple victims were traced back to Wellman Inc., a company that produced these fibers for a very short period, making them extremely rare. The same distinct fibers, with a two-lobed and one short-lobed shape, were found on the carpet of Wayne's bedroom. Police also found dog hairs on several victims, which were a match to the hairs from Wayne's German Shepherd. The FBI, after quickly forming a small prosecution team, determined that they had enough evidence to charge Wayne Williams for the murder of Nathaniel Cater. And so, on June 21, 1981, nearly 2 years after the first victim was discovered, Wayne Williams was arrested at his home.
Newell. After nearly 2 years, an arrest. Atlanta police today charged 23-year-old Wayne Williams with murdering one of the 28 young blacks who have been killed since July of 1979. This is the only arrest.
After his arrest, the prosecution worked quickly to gather as much evidence as they could to build their case. They concluded that charging Wayne with both the murder of Jimmy Ray Payne and Nathaniel Cater would reinforce their argument, as both deaths were very similar. With a formal indictment secured and Wayne pleading not guilty, the stage was set for one of the most highly publicized trials in Atlanta's history, the state of Georgia versus Wayne Williams. On the morning of January 6, 1982, the Atlanta courthouse was bustling with people hoping to catch a glimpse of what would become one of the most infamous trials in the city's history. With 12 jury members, 9 women and 3 men, the prosecution opened with painting Williams as a mad dog killer and pathological liar, using various character witnesses, fiber evidence, and eyewitness accounts. They tried to convince the jury that not only was Williams guilty of the 2 murders he was being tried for, but there were at least 10 more murders that fit the pattern of his killings. The evidence the prosecution used to indict Williams is as follows. Firstly, the validity of the many stories Wayne had told police and the public was beginning to be called into question. Prosecutors brought multiple witnesses who testified that Wayne Williams had lied regarding his work history, alibi, and whereabouts. They claimed he'd even lied about the woman he was crossing the bridge to see, Cheryl Johnson, as police noticed that the number and address he had provided to police led them to completely unrelated ends.
Williams claimed the girl lived in a nearby apartment complex. Prosecutors had several apartment managers on the stand, all testifying that no one named Cheryl Johnson ever lived in their buildings.
The prosecution's first strategy seemed to be slowly dismantling the jury's trust in the words of Wayne Williams. Once his words could be overlooked, the prosecution now turned to evidence. This is where they brought out the most damning findings in their case, the fibers and forensic evidence. During the police's search of Wayne's vehicle, they had found bloodstains in the back seat of his 1970 Chevrolet station wagon, which were consistent with the blood types of William Barrett and John Porter, 2 victims that had been found with stab wounds. Both bloodstains were found to contain enzymes that only remain active for up to 8 weeks as the blood begins to dry, which is consistent with the time frame of Barrett and Porter's murders. Lab results also found that the dog hairs found on 11 of the 12 bodies in question were consistent with Wayne's German Shepherd, and 2 hairs found on the body of Patrick Baltazar were likely to have originated from Williams's scalp. Lastly, and perhaps the most widely reported, was the fibers that were found on the victims' bodies. After intense analysis, many of these fibers could be traced back to an item in Wayne's home. The prosecution argued that it was very unlikely that all of these fibers, some of which were quite rare, could have ended up on this many bodies by coincidence. Surely, in the eyes of the prosecution, the only common denominator was Wayne Williams. The prosecution then shifted its focus to eyewitness testimony, challenging Wayne's claim that he didn't know any of the victims. Margaret Carter, who knew Nathaniel Cater, testified that she saw the two together just a week before Cater's body was found. 2 other witnesses reported seeing Wayne with Luby Jeter at a shopping center. One of them, a 15-year-old boy, stated that he saw Luby get into Wayne's car. The same witness also alleged that months earlier, Wayne had touched him inappropriately. He claimed that Wayne picked him up, drove him to the woods, and said that he was going to grab something from his trunk. When Wayne stepped out of the car, the boy seized the opportunity and ran away. Witness after witness took the stand, recalling moments where they saw Wayne interacting with these boys, sometimes just days before they vanished. The prosecution made it clear, this was no coincidence. The testimonies, paired with the fiber evidence, further reinforced their argument that Wayne Williams was no innocent bystander. But why? What drove Wayne to murder at least 12 black children and men? The prosecution presented many witnesses who claimed to have heard Williams make statements that hinted at a possible motive. Many claimed Williams expressed deep contempt for lower-income black individuals, often referring to them with slurs and claiming they had no initiative. One witness even claimed that Williams had asked if he ever considered how many black people could be eliminated by killing one black child. But while the prosecution presented a compelling case, the defense was ready to push back. With the support of Camille Bell and the other mothers of Stop, they argued that the case against Wayne Williams was built on circumstantial evidence, speculation, and weak forensics. First, the defense focused on the event that initially put Wayne Williams on the police's radar, the bridge incident. They argued that one of the recruits stationed on the bridge that night, Freddie Jacobs, had a history of making unreliable observations. Jacobs had frequently spoken about drinking beer during long shifts and admitted that, after having a few drinks, he would sometimes see hazy white figures on the water, what he described as ghosts. The defense used this to challenge his credibility, suggesting that Jacobs and the other recruits weren't fully alert or reliable witnesses at the time of the splash. They also argued that Wayne Williams, a 5'7", 23-year-old man, didn't have the physical strength to lift 27-year-old muscular Nathaniel Cater over the bridge's railing without leaving markings on it or Cater's body. They then shifted focus to the circumstantial fiber evidence. They argued that the state exaggerated the significance of fiber matches, making it seem as though tens of thousands of fibers linked the victims to Wayne's environment. In reality, they claimed, only about 90 fibers matched, with some cases relying on just a single microscopic fiber found on a victim. Not only this, but the defense accused the prosecution of selectively presenting evidence, ignoring thousands of other fibers that did not match Wayne's environment. Another big counter-argument to the prosecution's fiber evidence is the fact that if fibers from Wayne's environment had transferred to the victim's clothing so easily, why then did fibers from the victim's clothing not transfer to the environment of Wayne Williams? If fibers can be transferred one way, then why not both ways? This reverse fiber argument cast a doubt on the credibility of the fiber evidence, and the prosecution had no good answer. The defense, just like the prosecution, had eyewitness testimony of their own. Keith Andrews, the owner of Atlanta Studios, testified that Wayne Williams was at his studio space at the same time that the 15-year-old boy had said he saw Wayne at the shopping center with Luby Jeter. Similarly, a journalist that had interviewed Margaret Carter before the trial said that she had contradicted herself during her interview with him, severely damaging her credibility. As for the motive, Wayne's lawyers argued that the prosecution provided no psychological profile indicating that he had the mindset of a murderer, instead relying entirely on speculation. He had no history of violent behavior, no past criminal record, and they questioned why Wayne would kill only children from the very community he was trying to uplift through his work in the music industry. And so, the case was handed over to the jury. On February 22, 1982, just under 2 months since the trial began, the jury returned with a guilty verdict, sentencing Williams to 2 consecutive life sentences, one for each victim he was tried for. The verdict was, understandably, met with mixed reactions. For many in the mainstream media, the case was closed, and Wayne was the definitive serial killer of Atlanta. He was often referred to in the newspapers as a child killer, despite having only been tried for 2 adult victims, 21-year-old Jimmy Payne and 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater. The verdict was met with a sense of relief, especially for local businesses and officials who saw the conviction as a way to put the murders behind them and start to rebuild the city's reputation, which had been severely tarnished by the killer. But the Atlanta community had a far more complicated response.
I have mixed emotions, I really do, because I don't know. There was just not enough conclusive evidence, I don't think, in either of the 10 cases, to say that he is just guilty outright.
As soon as they got him and put him in jail or somewhere, the killing stopped. Practically stopped dead in his tracks. So I say he was the man.
I don't know. It was a hard decision to make, and with the evidence as far as I have followed, I could not have handed down a guilty verdict.
Many, especially the victims' parents, remained deeply skeptical.
If I believe that Wayne Williams killed the other 12 that they claim, the same fibers that were found on those bodies were also found on Yusef's body, then I must believe that Wayne Williams killed my son. But since I don't believe that Wayne Williams killed anybody, I can't believe that Wayne Williams therefore killed my son.
Wayne Williams had been charged and tried for 2 victims, while the prosecution introduced evidence from 10 additional cases, arguing that they formed a pattern of killings linked to him. This left 18 other victims unaddressed. Law enforcement later attributed 11 of these cases to Williams, citing incriminating evidence, but without any formal charges or trials.
With the conviction of Wayne Williams, we have reviewed all of the evidence that's present today, and as a result, we've cleared 23 cases.
For the mothers of these victims, this was unacceptable. Their children's cases were being closed without trial, without justice, and without their day in court. They petitioned the Attorney General only to be rejected. A few months later, they filed a federal lawsuit demanding that Williams be tried for the remaining victims. In response, District Attorney Lewis Slayton dismissed their plea, stating he wouldn't waste the county's money since Williams was already in prison. Others in the community believed that Wayne Williams wasn't the only killer, or even the right one. Rumors of KKK involvement had circulated for years, whispered among grieving families and community activists who felt the police had ignored key evidence. The KKK had a long and fraught history in Atlanta, so when Black children began disappearing in the city, many immediately suspected the Klan. In fact, even the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, or GBI, took this theory seriously, launching a secret investigation in February 1981 into potential KKK involvement in the Atlanta murders. The GBI quietly used wiretaps and informants to listen in on Klan conversations. What they uncovered was highly concerning. Klan members were urging each other to arm themselves, openly fantasizing about a coming race war in Atlanta, and, in at least one instance, casually discussing the murder of 14-year-old Luby Jeter a few months before his body was found. Meanwhile, a wiretap picked up a conversation between 2 Klan members. "I might get out and ride around a little bit. Go find you another kid? Yeah, scope out some places. We'll see you later." Despite these findings, the reason the investigation was kept secret, even from the task force, was because the GBI feared that if it was made public, it would ignite mass unrest or trigger a race war in Atlanta. Making public accusations towards Klan members without airtight evidence was dangerous, and once Wayne Williams became the prime suspect in mid-1981, law enforcement turned entirely towards him, effectively abandoning the Klan investigation. This was one of many oversights that journalists and retired officers later highlighted in the Atlanta child murders case. In his book, The List by Chet Detlinger, a retired police officer who worked on the case, he argued that the process of selecting which victims were included in the official list was far from scientific. Instead, he says, victims were added based on political pressure, public perception, and media attention rather than any concrete pattern. According to him, many cases that should have been included never made the list. For example, 22-year-old Faye Yearby was found dead and tied to a tree in January 1981, but was left off the list because she was too old, even though the police later added victims 5 years older than her. She was also excluded because she was female, even though 2 other girls, LaTanya Wilson and Angel Lanier, were also female and on the list. Not only this, but Detlinger also argued that the killings, contrary to popular belief, didn't stop after Wayne went to prison. They only stopped being recorded. He claims that in 1982 and early 1983, after Wayne had been convicted, 15 Black victims were murdered in unsolved cases within Atlanta, many being found in similar locations and with similar causes of death. Many believe that the Atlanta child murders ended with Wayne Williams' conviction, but others, including many victims' mothers, don't. Nonetheless, the city was forced to move on, mainstream media quieted down, and officials insisted that the crisis was over. But for some of the families of the victims, there was no closure, only more unanswered questions. The investigation had its challenges. The fiber evidence that linked Williams to some victims was compelling, but not rock solid, and admittedly, most of it was circumstantial. Even the list of victims felt randomly put together, leaving out cases that didn't fit the arbitrary pattern. And once the city sunk its teeth into its first suspect, key leads were pushed aside as Wayne Williams became the focus. As the legendary James Baldwin states in his book, The Evidence of Things Not Seen, written on the topic of the Atlanta child murders, the city too busy to hate has undergone the ordeal of 28, the official count, violently publicized murders. Black Death has never before elicited so much attention. The attention, the publicity, given to the slaughter becomes itself one more aspect of an unforgivable violation. Maybe Williams was guilty of some or all of the murders. Maybe he wasn't. What's clear is that Atlanta was desperate for an answer that would let the city move on, and in that rush, the full story of what happened to those 30 innocent victims may never truly be known.